For me, there came a moment when I had to choose. I had to decide between the support that I was going to have in a wife and a family,
Yeah.
or what I was seeing in the monastery.
Hey, I'm just Steve, and we're here recording our podcast with Michael Merrin today. And I'm excited because we don't really know each other, right?
That's true, no.
Your wife is like the catalyst of knowing your family. I worked with her way back in the day at ICCF,
Oh,
right?
goodness. An eon ago.
Eons ago, when I was starting my real estate career. She was a loan officer there, and that's how we met way back in the day. So I thought, our wives know us really well typically. And so she wrote this, I thought we'd read this bio and then get into it from there. But this is what she wrote. I thought I'd actually plug my husband, Mike. He's an interesting cat, is what she said. And people are often fascinated by him. He and I have been besties since high school, but our paths and marriage is definitely atypical. Mike is a former Catholic priest and actually spent 6 years in Poland. He was in a monastic community. Am I saying that
monastery,
right?
Monastic community.
Monastic community. I want to know what that is because that's a big word that I'm not familiar with. He was completely immersed. He's fluent in she's got like a dozen languages here. And she had another big word that means lots of stuff.
Polyglottic, maybe.
Yeah, yes, that's it. That's the word. When he was in Poland, because he's 6'4", he really stood out. So, they thought he was a spy. Anyways, he came back to the States and finally we got married. He fell back into restaurant management for a little while and then became executive chef and pantry director at Mel Trotter, and then was a director of a pantry. And then the last 8 years you've been working on your own company,
Yes.
Comfort Care.
Comfort Care. Yep.
Comfort Care. Cool. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it's great to have you. Thanks for driving out to Grand Haven. Weather made its way for us, which is great. Yeah, thank goodness. Yesterday was a little hairy.
It was.
But that's Michigan,
It's Michigan,
right? That's Michigan. So thanks for joining us. I guess, is all that true? Assuming the wife tells the truth, right?
Yeah, she's pretty accurate. Yep.
Yeah.
She's known me probably, longer than any other person in my life. Other than my parents, so.
Yeah. So you guys met in high school then?
Yeah. We were 15.
Okay.
We were in high school musical during the summers, community actually.
Okay.
Musical. HMS Pinafore, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Oftentimes she'll ask me to sing, something from it because I still remember all of the songs. One of those quirks of my memory.
Your family is very musically inclined, right? Because I was browsing the social media, and your daughter's really into music, right?
Yeah. So each of our kids have been involved when they were in high school with different aspects of music. Our youngest is graduating this year from Rockford, and she's a violinist. My middle child, Kai, was in band. And so years ago, he went to Macy's Day Parade and did that whole thing.
Amazing. Yeah. Did you go to visit?
We did. Yeah, we were there. It was
experience.
Insane. If you've never been, it's quite the experience. I equate it with going to see, Rome or the pyramids. It's huge.
Very American Rome.
Very American Rome, yeah. If you've never been in New York for one of the big crazy things like the Macy's Day Parade or the ball drop, Times Square, you owe it to yourself to do it at least once in your life. Yeah, that was an experience. Yeah. And my oldest, Micah, she was in choir, and they actually toured Italy as part of their program. So we've had musical things in our lives the last decade. At the very least.
So met from a musical, and then just kept that going. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me about obviously the podcast, we talk about lenses, right? And the idea of each individual human comes from different backgrounds, right?
Yes.
And from those backgrounds, they have a different perspective. And I think that the world needs those perspectives more than ever right now, right? It needs those voices. And the beauty with podcasting and also with video, we can just say and do that, right? Like no one's stopping us in America from speaking those lenses or those perspectives. And so I'm glad you're here, because there's a lot of like random questions that I came up with that I think your lens creates a different perspective than mine, for sure. But a lot of people here in West Michigan or the world that's watching, because I have no idea who's watching half the time, right? So can you give us sort of like some of those bullet point, big, meaningful, like life things that happen that create the lens for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking before the show. I live in Greenville with my wife, and we actually grew up there. So it's small town, Michigan, pretty sheltered, life. You know the people you know. Half the town went to the Catholic church, the other half went to Congregational church or the Methodist church. It was kind of, your average small town America, graduating class of about 100 people.
Wow.
Not an overly, ambitious community. Lots of gorgeous things there, but not a lot of movement to kind of get outside of itself,
Because it's comfortable there?
Probably. I think a lot of us get comfortable, in a small town setting.
Right.
Parents that, kind of grew up there, grandparents that grew up there. Sometimes, you're lucky if your family has been out of state, out of town. I remember I was 12 years old. We went to Cedar Point, and we crossed into Ohio, and I broke out in hives. I was so excited
because you're so far
to
away.
leave the state. So that was, if I'm looking at my life, that was probably the first moment when I realized I wanted to see and do
There's
a
big
lot
world
more,
out there.
and there's a lot bigger world out there than I had been exposed to in Greenville. So, and I don't think that there's anything bad about, people growing up and staying, in the radius of their own area. For a lot of folks, that's really comfortable. I was inspired at some point to go and see and do other things. So, graduated in 91, class of 91. I was 17, just before my 18th birthday. And by the beginning of the next year, by my second semester of college, I was living in Austria, which was a real experience.
Through college, you were in
through
Austria?
college.
Okay,
Yes.
where did you go to school?
So I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio.
Okay.
It's right on the border there between West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio.
Okay.
So in that
And that's a
tri-state
Catholic
area, Catholic University.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and went to school there. My undergrad, I was studying at the time. I was pre-law for one semester.
Okay. Yeah.
And an opportunity arose to go to their campus in Austria. It was the first year that they'd opened the program. Gorgeous little town called Gaming, and it was right in the foothills of the Alps. So it was mountains in the back and river out front.
I think of like Sound of Music right now.
Exactly. Salzburg wasn't far, It was a couple-hour drive from there. So it was smack dab in the middle between like Salzburg and Vienna if you were to take the train. So great little area for an 18-year-old to kind of, see new things. First interesting thing was it was a former Carthusian monastery. Monastery, and get back to that term, monastic, that you were asking about earlier. The monks that had lived there about 800 years prior were of an order that took vows of silence. So it was really interesting.
These were Catholic monks?
Catholic monks, yep.
Because there's different, like there's Buddhist,
there are
right?
Buddhist, Catholic, there are Orthodox Christians and others that have monastic traditions. Yep.
Okay.
So this would have been a Catholic tradition. the Carthusian comes from a French word that basically means like the charter house or the big house. And so they have a lifestyle that's based around this communal living, but silent spiritual life. And so that was an interesting place to be as an 18-year-old. It was obviously had been.
So the school was part of this.
It was in that building.
Okay.
And I was there the second semester that it was open, one of about 100 students.
Okay.
And it was phenomenal. The monastery had been kind of restored to a place where they hosted schools like us. We were there during the school year. There were portions that were sectioned off for ski resort kind of stays and that kind of thing. But it was really, really interesting. The murals on the wall, I remember one of the big ones was a set of skeletons, and it said memento mori, which was a Carthusian phrase that in Latin that meant "remember your death," and it was one of the greetings that they used for each other in the monastery. "Remember your death, brother," because they wanted to give all of the members of the community this reminder that they're meant to be thinking about otherworldly things, the next life, about heaven, about God, to be transcendent in a way of this life. So remember, kind of like the biblical passage, that you're dust, and from dust you're made, and to dust you shall return, kind of to put that in front of your face on a daily basis. So it was interesting to have that as a reminder.
As an 18-year-old.
As an 18-year-old in Europe. For the first time.
In a whole different world.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And so we had professors.
So that's stuck with you, right?
Absolutely.
Like that saying, is that still something that stays with you? Like that mindset of like, okay, is it the idea of not being focused on the here and now because I should be focused on the, help me understand.
My spirituality has changed a good bit, in the 30 years, since I was there more than 30 years now. But it meant a lot to me at the time, and it taught me to kind of look at things a little bit differently. I was experiencing a world outside of my own comfort zone, outside of my own language, outside of my own culture. We had 3 or 4 days of instruction during the week, and then we had the ability to travel on the weekends. And it was Europe at a time when, the Berlin Wall had just come down a couple of years earlier. Half of the countries under the Iron Curtain had just kind of declared their independence. There was still a lot of civil unrest in, former Yugoslavia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, in that area. So a lot of the places that we were going on the weekends, were kind of in flux. It was a really, really interesting time to be there. Probably the next biggest thing that kind of changed my perspective. I was like kind of an angsty teenager, as a lot of us are. And I remember going to Rome on one of the longer trips that we had with the students. We traveled all together for that Rome trip, and just being kind of overwhelmed with the juxtaposition between people on the streets begging. At the time, it was a lot of Tsigani, the gypsies, formerly what we would have called them. I think Romani, maybe. A lot of folks that had come from very impoverished parts of the former Soviet Union, and now were trying to make their way begging, on the streets. There was a large population of Serbians as well, and Bosnians and others that were refugees. And there was turmoil in the Sudan. So you had the Sudanese there as well. So lots of folks on the streets just in abject poverty and really needing help, and assistance. And then to set that against the treasures of the Vatican, and the gilded tapestry and the churches and the buildings and the sculptures and all of those riches, that are collected there.
Yeah, you had both the low and the high
exactly.
in front of you.
Yeah, and again, I was 18, really impressionable, very young, experiencing these things for the first time. And it really kind of flipped a switch that I wanted to work towards some sort of social justice. I wanted to work definitely doing good in the world. I wanted to minimize those kind of situations where folks were suffering like that, where you had that kind of juxtaposition or extremes in the world, income extremes and whatnot. It really it touched me, and kind of set the stage for what the rest of my life is going to look like.
Right.
So,
right. Is that so? I'm going to jump ahead and then we'll go back. But is that you probably felt that and saw that at Mel Trotter during your Mel Trotter because it wouldn't be politically correct, but ultimately that was I feel like that's still going on, but even more so during your period of time 7 or 8 years ago, because I was very vested in the city at that time. I still am, but I was representing 3 or 4 really expensive downtown condos, right? And so this idea of I'm selling $1 million condo and then there's this homeless population that Mel Trotter is a center point in. It was that.
It was the same juxtaposition.
It was a very weird world where it's like,
really
okay,
was.
like, hey, how do we balance? And they're still struggling with some of that balance of how do you service one population and another population that are very different.
It was interesting.
Did you notice that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Beta salon was across the street. I mean, you could go and get a $120 haircut or, a $15 cup of coffee or, go and here's a homeless shelter where we're taking in folks off the street who don't have any place to sleep. It was a very interesting time down there too.
It seems like a push-pull, but I think of trying to relate people that would not have had that experience in Rome, but I feel like we have our own small Romes in every community has
right?
We just try not to look at it, I feel like, most of the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be that kind of a tear between those that have and those that have not, and you're going to see that in a lot of places. Sometimes in places, though, come to epitomize it or become like a real symbol of it. And that, the time that you're talking about in downtown Grand Rapids was very much like that. What do we do with the homeless? What do we do with veterans? The mentally ill? How do we help these folks? Because we also want to build, $1 million condos next door to them and tell those people that it's safe to be here. And it was a very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll get into that a little bit more.
I was down there about a decade. So
yeah. So, but I just think of that, right? Of how relatable that is, right? And how in our world we still have that, right? And it doesn't just go away.
No.
It's just sometimes it's more magnified, right? Where you're seeing the beggar on the street, and then you're in Rome. But I think that we all have our Romes in our spaces, right? So you realize then, just following up the story, that you're in Rome, that there's a need that is burning in your heart to serve, right? Ultimately, that there's a disjustice or there's a battle between that mental of have and have not, and you're being. Is it being called?
The calling, right?
The calling, right? We had this. So I'm part of a men's group, and it's a books club, so it's not a men's group, but it is, right? But we had this really fascinating conversation last week about calling. Well, just about religion, and then some people are like, yeah, I've been called to do this, or have been called before, and others are like, what is that?
What does that mean?
I don't like. I've never like. I grew up in a religious background, but I don't is my work my calling? Like what is that? Right? Yeah.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, the calling. Obviously, when you go into a monastery, when you become a Catholic priest, you think that there's a calling. This is something you're supposed to do, that you're being called to do. For me, growing up Catholic, you're kind of given a couple of options. If you're a Catholic, you either are going to go the route of completely kind of secular, live your life, go to church on Sunday. Or if you're interested in doing something more or something bigger, at least the feeling is that you need to invest in doing something different, an alternative lifestyle of some sort.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot more movement maybe since the 70s towards secular deacons, folks that are active in their church but aren't part of the celibate clergy, and that kind of thing. For me, it was an interesting transition. I was known my wife for going on 4 years at that time, when I was thinking about these things. I'd been desperately in love with her, and she and I weren't on the same page at the time.
Yeah.
I think there were a couple of times in college where we might have been on the page for about a week or two, and then somebody starts dating somebody else, and it just all seemed, like that. I came to a realization that I could do a lot of good in a position where I was devoted to my work, and my work being doing good. So I thought the way to do that was to go into the priesthood, and
because that was the model.
That was a model. It was a model, probably the one promoted pushed model
30 years ago was
exactly.
Like, if you're going to do good,
yes,
in your part of the Catholic Church, this is the way you do it.
Yeah,
and the secular way is still good. But
just
we need
make
their
sure
money.
You have a lot of kids.
Right?
So yeah. Okay. All of that's very true. Yeah, and so at the time that was kind of the pushed model. And having gone to Franciscan University of Steubenville, it was a big thing there, that talk of calling. And I tossed that idea around for about a year and a half. And at one point I was having a conversation with my now wife when we were both home on a break. I don't know if it was summer or what, but she started talking about, when we get older, when we grow up, maybe we could have like a duplex, and you could live on one side with your spouse, and I could live on one side with my spouse, and we'd have our kids, and we'd have a backyard, and the kids could play together, and we could hang out every day. And I'm like, she's not ever going to get on the same page that I am. At least, that was the idea at that time. It was like, okay, she's still not seeing that what she wants from me is what, a marriage is, or life. So I was like,
I'll have to get her on.
Yeah.
We'll get her side.
So it'll be interesting. Right? So that kind of cinched the deal for me. At that point, I'm like, as much as I love her, and she's always going to be a part of my life, we're never going to be on that same page. And it's time for me to just invest in me, maybe. It was more of a self-emulation or emulation to kind of a, I don't say self-destructive very easily, but in Catholic circles, you have this kind of a, devotio moderna was kind of the name for it in like the 1700s, where it was just you kind of put yourself on the fire, to you burn up your talents for the community, for God, for the people. So that was kind of
like a deconstruction, and then a reconstruction after that. Is that the idea?
You spend yourself. Basically, you spend your energy for nuns or for a lot of religious sisters and brothers. It was kind of being a spouse of Jesus, kind of a thing. Yeah. Priesthood is focused more towards the community, so it was a little bit of those elements. And I was attracted most to spirituality of the Carmelites, and it was a monastic order that originated in Europe, kind of by way of the Holy Land, on Mount Carmel. between like 1100 and 1600,
Okay.
where these folks had gotten the call, while they were either on the Crusades or after the Crusades to spend their lives in a community, and to spend more of that quality, quiet time with devotion. And in probably the 1400s, it started to turn outwards again more. So you had the mendicant priests and brothers that went out of those communities. So you would gather together for communal life. You'd have these times of kind of like reconstruction, healing, kind of gaining the energy to go out and then do works, in the community to bring that word, to the people. And by the time the 1700s rolled around, it had gotten to the point where it was kind of a tired old shoe, and they reinvented things. So I was really attracted to Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. John of the Cross's works were very philosophical. The big one that probably a lot of folks know, even outside of religious circles, as like a literary work is The Dark Knight, and talks about, kind of just spending yourself in the service of God or in the service of others. And that really appealed to me for some reason. So I started my second to last year of college. I kind of packed up my stuff and got in my car and drove around to a couple of monasteries, spent a time here and there. There are
in the U.S. here?
In the U.S., yep. There are a few here in the States that had appealed to me, and I went there and visited, spent a couple of weeks, and kind of got the feel for what I was looking for. That's where I came across the Polish Carmelites, just outside of Chicago in Munster, Indiana. And English was not a strong point for a lot of them, but they had a good community life and they were doing good work. And I decided at the end of that stay that summer that's where I was going to go when I graduated with my undergraduate degree. So.
And what did you graduate with? Like, how does that like?
Yeah, so I changed my major about 3 semesters before I was supposed to graduate, and switched to philosophy with a minor in like seminary prep, pre-seminary study. So I had been a poli-sci major, I mentioned that first semester, and then I changed to education, English, drama, and literature. And I had a bit of a snafu. After I got back from Europe that semester, I had been dating a girl for about a year, and things started to kind of come apart, and I failed a couple of classes. Got myself on academic probation. My parents, came down and packed, tried to pack me up and bring me home, and I told them, no, I wasn't going. I'm staying, I'll figure this out myself. So I actually took a semester off, and I started working on campus. And got introduced to a couple of folks. I ended up living in a house with 3 philosophy majors, which was an interesting time, kind of Plato's cave conversations in the basement, and, coffee and wine and different things. It was a very interesting time. I was working doing catering management for Marriott, who ran the college food service. And ultimately, my time there full-time qualified me to utilize the university tuition program for free. And so I was able to
keep going.
So I did. I graduated a year and a half later with a philosophy degree, but it meant that I had to take 18 credit hours of philosophy for 3 semesters.
That's a lot. So you're just thinking the whole time.
It was a lot of thinking. Lots of fun. A couple of the professors I had for a couple of 200 level classes and 500 level classes, because they had like a 3-2 program. So I was in a couple of grad classes while I was in my first semesters of philosophy as well. It was very interesting time. So.
Okay. So you went and joined this.
I
So
did.
do you become a, so I don't know the Catholic
Right.
Church, right?
Okay.
So you became a priest and then you joined.
No, you did the priesthood last. It's kind of,
Okay.
There is a lot of preparation for priesthood.
Right.
Even stateside here, typically folks get a divinity degree, a master's of divinity.
Yeah.
So that's grad school. And then there's a period where you serve as a deacon, and then you're ordained to the priesthood.
Okay.
So that's like kind of the long journey.
Okay.
You start out as a novice or postulant actually, and then a novice, which is it's like boot camp for monastic candidates.
Okay.
So I was one of a handful of folks that were actually interested at the time in this Polish community. The only one that stayed, 4 other folks kind of came and went in that few months that I was there.
Yeah.
They started looking at that point, I was by myself, and they thought it would be beneficial for me to be in a novitiate class. So kind of like boot camp by yourself is kind of silly and a little lonely.
Yeah.
And so they're like, we're going to send you over to Poland, and we want you to go join a group of 30 other candidates. So you become part of a group. And that's what I did. So that was December after I graduated. They sent me to Poland. I'd never studied Polish. I had not a lick of Polish language down. I had no Polish ancestry, no nothing. It was a very interesting experience. I show up, and from day one, you're expected to be silent most of the time.
Okay.
And then when you are given an opportunity to speak, whether that's in the context of religious services, reading of scriptures or the Psalms or whatever, singing, it's all in Polish. So it was an interesting thing, kind of got thrown into it. And, it is true that you learn a great deal more in immersion situations than you would elsewhere. I had a couple of years of French in high school and a couple of years of German in college, and neither of those helped me in the least, there. Polish is part of a language group, Slavic languages, that comes from an old root language called Staroslav or Old Slavonic. And it's ancient, and it doesn't have any roots with any of the languages that we grew up hearing here. So it was an interesting setting.
So tell me about the experience. So you spent 4 years then there, right? In Poland at this monastery.
In total, I was there about 6.5 years.
6.5 years.
Yeah. So.
And then how much did you stay? How much was it this quiet learning experience? And then how much of it was that going out into the community?
Yep.
What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it all changes. At different stages, it changes a good deal. So that novitiate time is meant to be spent in reflection. It's supposed to last about a year. I had started, of course, in the fall in the United States, and then joined a group in December in
Is that
Poland.
supposed to get you to a point that, like, what is that what is their idea of that progress?
Yeah. So they're introducing you to the concepts of poverty, chastity, obedience, the monastic ideals. They're introducing you to the setting and the cycle of the liturgy, the services, and all of that.
Is that a lonely experience?
It can be, yeah. It was an interesting time for me. I was there. There was a fresh group of Slovak novices as well that had come from the Bratislava area in Slovakia. They had just opened a monastery there, and so it was fresh, brand new. They hadn't had a monastic presence in Slovakia in probably 100 years, mostly probably due to communism.
Russia, yeah.
So these were young folks like myself, probably a couple of years younger than I was for the most part, because I had my undergraduate studies, and so they were there along the same time I was there. They also didn't speak Polish. Now, Slovak and Polish are similar enough that you can kind of get by one to the other, but we're all supposed to be being quiet, remember?
Right, yeah.
So I'm sent out to the gardens to work with the Slovaks, and they're all chatting back and forth in Slovak the whole time. And so it was interesting. The only language I'm hearing at that point is Slovak. And when we get to Saturday, Sunday, we have some opportunity to talk with the Polish brothers and whatnot. I'm saying words that aren't Polish, they're Slovak. So
Yeah. Okay.
At that point, the jig was up that we were talking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was realizing, boy, I'm not learning Polish. I'm,
Immersion is a little different.
Immersion is a little different. I was
Yeah.
being immersed in two different Slavic languages simultaneously. So it was an interesting time. But by the spring, between the repetition of you in monastic communities, you read the Psalms. It's called the Hours, and you go through the Psalm book, over the course of a period of time. And in groupings of 3 Psalms, you either sing or chant or read. And then there are readings and meditations that kind of go in between. You do that. The hours are like 9 different times during the day, right? So I was getting a lot of exposure to, I'm seeing it on paper. I'm hearing it in the liturgy. I'm hearing Slovaks using their language, which is kind of similar, but not the same. And so picking up differences. I would say by July, end of July, beginning of August, something just clicked. And I was able to speak, think, dream, all in Polish. It was that kind of an immersion. At that point, they're like, gosh, you might actually be ready to go and do studies if you wanted to, So my novitiate class was getting ready to graduate and head off to studies. They hadn't done their philosophy studies yet, so they were going to go to College of Lublin to do philosophy. But there was a group that had been in philosophy for 2 years that was going to Krakow, where theology was located. And they said, would you be interested? Initially, the thought was I was going to go to a novitiate for a year, learn enough Polish to kind of get by, and then I was going to go to Rome probably and do my theology studies in
Rome,
in Latin or in Italian, which would have been a little easier language for someone from my background. But for whatever reason, I picked it up. The Polish clicked, and by the fall, I was fluent enough to do graduate studies in Polish, which seems insane to me now when you look back at it. But my mind was just a little bit more malleable, I guess, at 21, 22, than I was now. So, so I went off to study theology in Krakow and start my graduate program there. So it was an interesting time. There were some deficiencies that I needed to make up for. During philosophy, the folks that had gone to Lublin were given 2 years of Italian instruction. They were given 2 years of Latin and 2 years of Greek. And there was a church history course that spanned the 2 years there. And because I had my degree in philosophy, which covered all of the other stuff, but not those things, when I got to theology, I had to do an independent study in an ancient language, modern language, and church history, and take exams in that. So on top of what turned out to be about 35 hours of instruction a week, I had to do those independent studies. But it was interesting. This is where my wife's talking about me being a bit of a polyglot kind of comes in, I think. But I had to test out of college level Italian, college level Greek, not a modern Greek, but an ancient Greek, and into a third year for Latin. And all independent studying. So I'm cramming foreign languages. The books that I have are in a foreign language. So it's learn a language in Polish.
Did you find that time like grow? Like, did you enjoy it, or was it just
I
like, oh, this is
did.
part of the process, I need to get through this to then start
Yeah.
doing what I originally thought I wanted to do when I was in Rome
Yeah.
at 18, right? Like,
Yeah.
I, I, we're in the U.S. We're not very good at delayed gratification,
Right.
which seems like you had a
That's very
lot.
true,
Like
yeah.
you had to be quiet. You had to
Yeah.
learn multiple languages.
Yeah.
How did that feel that way to you during that process, that you were denying your future goal for your current
Yeah.
path that needs to occur to have the future goal?
Yes
Or did
and
you feel like
no.
you were in it already, that
Yes
this
and
was
no.
just
So
part
there
of the
were a
process?
couple of opportunities there. So while I was doing those studies, I figured out that I really enjoy studying, that I enjoyed academics, that
Yeah.
I enjoyed languages, which I didn't realize. And at the same time, I was able to do some work with the youth group. We did a lot of hiking and mountain climbing with these youth. We'd take them on these extravagant kind of camping trips,
Yeah.
and there were brothers in the community that played guitars, and we did, kind of youth praise and worship, and
Okay.
that kind of stuff. So
In Poland.
in Poland,
Yeah.
in Polish, and so all of those things were part of that.
Okay.
Um, as I got kind of through the studies a little bit more, I had some other opportunities. I served in a couple of churches in the Czech Republic, which was interesting. Czech Republic is just south of Poland. Another similar language, not the same. And I was working initially in a parish that was in a mountain region there. So it was one side of the mountain is Poland, the other side is the Czech Republic, and the people in the middle kind of speak something akin to both,
Okay. Yeah.
So it was an interesting time. I was able to be in a parish community there, kind of learn what that looked like, for a monastic to be in a parish and serve. I was clicking through the boxes, kind of getting the language down myself. And then I went to spend a couple of months in Prague, in the Czech Republic. Stayed at the monastery there. Pretty famous place. It's the monastery of the Carmelites there is devoted to the infant Jesus of Prague, which is a little statue of Jesus as a baby. And it has a long history and quite a cult following. And so I was there with the Genoese brothers. So that was Italian Carmelites that were there in the Czech Republic, trying to serve in Czech as well. There were a couple of visitors that came from India, and I believe someone there was there from Goa for a while. So we had kind of a diverse community, and just kind of learning that language, learning to serve in a sanctuary setting, and to work with nuns, because there were Carmelite nuns in the area there that they worked with. So it was actually an interesting thing. I was there in 2000 as well, and rang in the New Year in the bell tower there, which was pretty neat. So everybody's phone starts going off. They think it's Y2K, it's the end of the world, that kind of a thing.
I remember that. Yeah.
It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
And lights are going out in parts of town, and we're up in the bell tower ringing the bell going, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
Yeah. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
So how, what's fascinating to me, and maybe I'd love you to speak into that young 20-year-old that's trying to find their way in the world.
Yep.
Did you just raise your hand a lot saying, I'm open, send me? Like, how would...
Anything they asked, I did.
It seemed like you, like, from this journey, it's been 30 plus minutes of you talking about just like this 5-year period, right?
Yeah.
But it seemed like you did so much. And I know there's a lot of life that we still haven't unpacked.
Right.
But I think of a 20-year-old, my two oldest boys are 16, right? Like trying to help them imagine a world outside of their little bubble right now. But then how did you just openly told people, or they just noticed your Midwest work ethic? Like what,
Maybe.
like what, where
Yeah.
did you, how did you put yourself into those places that said, I am willing to go, send me?
Sure. Well, that's a very biblical thing,
Right.
it is I, Lord, is send me,
Yeah.
I had that kind of an attitude and I really wanted to kind of experience it all. And so it was a unique opportunity. Um,
Okay.
I equate being in like a monastic community like that these days, and being in particularly one that's European based and has a lot of connections with being in the military.
Okay.
A lot of young people, they're leaving their small hometown, they go in the
Yeah.
military, and next thing you know, they're in
Traveling
the
all over the world.
Kush,
Yeah.
or they're in Kuwait, they're in,
Right.
Baghdad, you name it. They've seen things, they've been places, and it was very similar with me.
Okay.
I had opportunities to, as I grew in my training and spent more time there. I went to places like Berdichev in the Ukraine, which is just 35-minute drive from Chernobyl. I
Yeah.
was there in '97 for several months around Easter. And Kyiv, which big center of the Ukraine there. So these places that you've been hearing in the news the last couple of
Yeah.
years, I spent time there,
Yeah.
and there was just amazing kleptocracy going on there. The government was foul. The local government had like no grasp on control. The infrastructure was failing. I was there 2 days before I got a meal. It was insane. It
Yeah.
really was.
Okay.
We had opportunities there to work in like really big sanctuary. Used to be kind of a central place where folks would gather from all the different counties to come to celebrate church holidays.
Okay.
And so it became a center for a lot of things. There were a lot of folks there receiving medical attention because they'd been born in the aftermath of Chernobyl,
Okay.
and so again, an interesting place,
Yeah.
interesting time,
Yeah.
an opportunity to learn Ukrainian, to the best of my
Right.
ability in that
Right.
situation. So,
So
yeah,
how did you transition out of this? So you transitioned out of this world, right? You spent 6 years
yeah,
like all over Europe,
yep,
experience. I mean, what an amazing opportunity to experience the world
yeah,
at such a young age,
it was
right?
amazing. Yeah,
And then all of a sudden you decided that this is not what you're called. Like
yeah,
I don't know if it's all of a sudden, but I
yeah.
just remember my ex-wife and I, we spent 4 months in the Bahamas and then
Hmm.
a year in Biloxi, Mississippi, doing Habitat for Humanity
Oh,
and relief
wonderful.
work.
Yeah,
And I remember coming back from that experience thinking, and going to a big church in West Michigan. And I remember hiding behind one of the pillars because I was overwhelmed
yeah,
by the riches that were around me that I didn't know,
yeah,
right? But just like how big and vast this bubble that I came out of is
yeah,
compared to what I had just seen and experienced, and trying to balance that
yeah,
mindset is like, okay, who am I? Like, how do I re-engage the world of West Michigan, US with this like heart for the impoverished, and I don't know where to go, right?
yeah.
How did you transition? Like, where was
Sure.
that moment that you're like, it's time for me to transition back into this world that I came out of
Yeah.
as a child?
Yep. So I was getting ready to go finish graduate studies. I finished what was called a sacred licentiate in theology. And the next thing would have been to go and finish a doctorate, which is
Okay.
about a year of studies, write a thesis. And I was actually in Rome in May of 2000 to kind of visit and see which of the colleges might be, the best fit for me to finish a doctorate. I got the call probably mid-May, June, that they really wanted me to go back to the States, to Munster, and do a year of active work in my home country, in my home language, and
Yeah.
in in the work that we were doing there
Yeah.
in the Chicago area. And I was a bit bummed, that I was coming back, but it was a good thing in the end.
You felt like that was a lowering of where you wanted to go? Because here you're like, I'm going to go to Rome. I'm going to get my doctorate.
Finish my
this is the road
Yep.
to.
Yeah. There were a couple of things. They had offered me, I'd had offerings of like positions after I finished my doctorate. One was working with a Maltese Carmelite that was in Kuwait. He was the bishop there, and he really wanted an assistant that could speak English as a primary language, but then also knew Slavic languages, because there were a lot of Poles and Slovaks and whatnot that were living there and working in the oil fields.
Okay.
So that was one opportunity. So that would have opened up kind of the Middle East, for me. Another opportunity that was offered to me was to work and ultimately kind of run a seminary in Nairobi.
Okay.
And so I had these ideas, these plans that folks had kind of been putting in my head,
Right.
that.
Which as a young 20-year-old feels good, right? Oh man,
absolutely.
I've done all this work, and like
I'm
people,
go and do something
especially
really
rooted in that Midwest, strive for achievement.
Yeah.
Hard work equals a payout, right?
Absolutely.
Even though I'm doing it within the confines of a religious mindset, I think you don't lose that lens, right? That Midwest of hard work equals something that's really cool or really big, right?
Precisely.
So you have these big opportunities, and then you're being told, go to Indiana.
It's not bad. I tried. Believe me, it was a wonderful opportunity. I came back to the States, and I was one of two folks that really had a grasp on the English language, there. And there were about 12 others, mostly older folks, priests and brothers from Poland. Immediately, I got kind of recruited to teach religion at the local Catholic school.
Okay.
So I was doing that full time. I chaplained in 2 different hospitals there, almost full time, between the 2 of them.
So you are doing the work then.
I'm doing the
right?
work.
We're still in studies because you're always studying to learn, but ultimately you were placed there to do the work.
Right.
Okay.
And I have a unique kind of a skill set in that, English is my first language, but I'm also fluent in Polish. I always call Polish my second language,
Okay. Yeah.
but I'm also pretty fluent in Spanish and others. So I was called to go and sit in the confessionals kind of in the suburban areas of Chicago. And they would check you into a confessional there to hear folks' confessions prior to the holidays. And you'd put the languages that you can hear confession in on the outside. And I had a board of about 7 of them there. And so it was, I was in pretty popular demand, when I'd show up at those places. They loved that, they had somebody that could take on, confessions and
in their own
languages. And was working with
what an honor.
It was.
Like,
it was
did you
really
feel that?
Yeah,
did you,
it was to listen to an older Ukrainian woman talk about kicking the chickens, kind of a thing, and just her turmoil, spiritually about cursing or those kind of things, or some of the more serious situations, it was humbling.
To hear someone's story, right, and to hear it so that they can speak it the right way
that
for
they
them,
want to or can, or best can relay that.
Did you feel like your studies, because of all your studies, that allowed for that opportunity? Like obviously that allowed for that opportunity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was very nice. Those were kind of the highlights, Then there were some low periods too, I was working with a couple of prayer groups, Knights of Columbus, you name it, kind of gets kind of thrown on your plate when you're a Catholic priest and you're young and you're an English speaker, and so I found that I was working probably 85 hours a week as a
Which
Catholic
is
priest.
nonprofit, right? Ultimately, I mean, that was part of the reason that we came home after Katrina, like during Katrina, because we could have re-upped, but it was like, we don't even know each other anymore. We're both sort of working these. And again, that was some our fault because we're from the Midwest. And so you just work.
You just do. Yeah.
You just do, right?
Yep.
You don't, if work needs to be done, you do the work, right?
If a Knights of Columbus group needs a chaplain, you're a chaplain. If they need somebody at the hospital to go say last rites or to hear a confession, you go and you do it.
But it does burn you out.
It does.
Yeah.
And I hadn't anticipated that kind of a burnout in service. Burning yourself out in service was kind of my thought. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, you were trying to spend your
but I was burning at both ends. I kind of felt at times like it was a bit of a dumpster fire. Like this is a lot. It's a little too much. The other thing that was playing on me at this time, my wife had started kind of pursuing me from a distance while I was still in Poland and trying to convince me to come home, that she was ready. She wanted to be in a relationship, that she'd realized,
But you're on the road to being a priesthood,
exactly.
which is,
and
we're not supposed to have wives.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the two didn't meld, right?
Yeah.
So, I actually had come home in 99 for my diaconate ordination, had it here in the States. And my wife, as a guest, came and just bawled incessantly the whole time. And friends and family asked, is that your sister? I'm like, no, that's my friend from high school. And they're all like, oh.
Yeah, that's a little bit much.
That's a little bit much for a friend from high school.
Yeah, that's some emotion.
It made a lot of sense if you knew our history. But it was really easy to say I wasn't interested from 6,000 miles away.
Right.
It was a lot harder from Munster, Indiana, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes away. We started talking a little more while I was in the throes of that year of teaching and chaplaining and hearing confessions and saying services and preaching. And it got really hard to say, I don't want to be with you, because I did. I always had. Right. I just never thought it was possible. So at that point,
she obviously was worth the wait.
Yeah, and she was wearing on me. It was good in a good way. No, don't get me wrong.
No,
it was. It became really apparent to me that in the work that I was doing, if I was going to do that kind of work, I needed a support system, which the monastic life is kind of supposed to be, right? You go back to the community. The group. There are those other brothers there. They all know what's going on. You have, your communities of nuns, the sisters that are praying for you, they're rooting for you in the background. You go and visit them, occasionally and, exchange accolades and praises and whatnot. And it's all fun, and you get rebuilt and you go out and you do the work. And what I was finding is that system was failing me drastically.
You didn't have that connection.
No.
You were feeling that connection.
I wasn't feeling that connection.
Because you were working too much, or because
I think because of the demands here in the States.
Okay.
So when I was in Europe, it was a very different setting, very different situation, especially in Poland. Even with communism and whatnot, Catholicism still held a really prominent place in that country. And people still went to church. There was a lot of that there. Here in the States, it's kind of fewer and farther between. And there were a lot of churches in like the Gary Diocese, Chicago Diocese, where I was serving, that didn't have a regular priest, or had a regular priest, but he wanted to golf, and wasn't going to do Monday services, Wednesday services, whatever.
Okay.
And so him having that work-life balance meant that they kind of sent it out for someone else to do. And I got conscripted, to do those things. And so I found I was overworked and had very little support, know.
Yeah.
And
that is the basis of nonprofit, right?
Yeah,
let's talk about that for a minute.
It's the rest of my life,
right?
For the most part,
Yeah, because again, I did work that nonprofit world for a very small period of time, but it is that one of the greatest challenges for nonprofits in the U.S., that we overwork people and give them the foundation and support that they need to actually have a family or have a personal time for themselves?
Yeah, my children are absolutely wonderful, and I love them to pieces. And I have spent far too much time trying to discourage them from going the route that I did with the nonprofits after I left the
Okay.
monastery. So I spent 17 years in nonprofit work after I left the
Yeah.
monastery. And again, it was, you miss things, you miss family,
Yeah.
events, you're scheduled 40 hours, you're working 70, you're constantly on call. You pick up that phone
Yeah.
every time there's
Yeah.
an emergency. Yeah, the nonprofit world was very much like that year that I spent.
Was it worth it? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, how
it
do you
was.
balance that, right? Like, you're telling me that you're telling your kids don't go down the
Yeah, and I probably
nonprofit route.
shouldn't, because they're good kids and they're going to do it anyway.
They're going to do whatever
Yeah,
they
yeah.
choose, right?
Right.
We don't really, we can guide, but we can't.
For me, there came a moment when I had to choose. I had to decide between the support that I was going to have in a wife and a family,
Yep.
or what I was seeing in the monastery. If I were to stay in the States and continue to do the work that I was doing here as a Catholic priest and a monk, I was going to burn out, and I probably would have been dead by the time I was 65, I would think. It was just that kind of an exhaustion.
Is that what the priests deal with here in the U.S.?
Yeah.
That they are exhausted, that
I
they
think
are
so. Yeah.
overworked compared to their companions in
Yes.
Europe and other areas?
In other places, yeah. And I think that situations like the monastery that I was in particular, we were kind of supply priests. We got kind of farmed out quite a bit to those local places to give those diocesan priests a bit of a break.
Okay.
And I think in those particular communities, that lifestyle of just burn fast, die young is kind of prevalent,
Okay.
unfortunately. So.
And that's still the case, you think?
I do. Yeah. I do.
Is that where the Catholic Church has really struggled in the U.S., and especially obviously with all the allegations out there? Is that because they're just don't have a community? I don't want to put the allegations in that small of a bucket, right? But is that a systemic issue that you think that the Catholic Church needs to figure out in the U.S.?
I think there are dioceses that do it well, and there are some monasteries or friaries, places where priests and religious kind of live together, that do things well. And then I think that there are others that really don't, and
which is normal with any big organization, right? Ultimately,
yeah. And what I think, unfortunately, for the Catholic Church, I left the priesthood about the same time that a lot of these scandals were starting to happen here in the States. So it was an interesting time to be an ex-priest as well, But the fact of the matter is that a lot of priests do not have the support in the parishes or in the monasteries that they're in to do the work that they're required to do. I found that support personally. I found that in marriage. My wife has been that support for me. My partner, she's been there for me. For all the decisions, for the kids. For all of the things. Even when I was overworked and doing too much in the nonprofit world, we both worked in the nonprofits for a while there. So it was kind of both of us were kind of burning, at the same time as our kids were little.
Are you still part of the Catholic Church then? Are you practicing Catholic?
No. So one of the things that happened when I was in Eastern Europe was I was fascinated by the East.
Okay.
And I looked at Eastern Orthodoxy in a different light. I wanted to become a part of the Orthodox tradition. Now, I don't know how much you know about that, but here in the States, the churches are very nationalistic. They're separated by language, nation, culture. So you have Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, etc. And they all have kind of their own little flair.
And that's based out of their history, their lens that they hundreds of years.
Yeah. And most of them here in the States look at themselves as some sort of a diaspora of that distant mother church, you know.
Yep.
So I was really interested in the tradition of the Eastern Church, the liturgies, the language. It was much more appealing to me than my own Catholic upbringing. And so, particularly when I was in the Ukraine, I got kind of exposed to that. I asked about the possibility of just becoming an Eastern Rite Catholic priest, and that was denied because I had been raised Roman Catholic, and they weren't doing that anymore. In particular, one of the reasons was that a lot of people apparently had been looking at that move so that they could get married, because Eastern Rite Catholics have spouses or can have spouses. So that was denied me. So I actually left the Catholic Church when I left and went to the Orthodox Church. And my wife and I just tried. That's where we were married. All three of our kids were
in
the Orthodox Church. All three of our children were, baptized in the Orthodox tradition. I bounced around a little bit. I was at the Antiochian Orthodox for a while, which is Syrian Lebanese, and then I wasn't finding a pathway to priesthood there, to serving as a priest. So there were a couple of folks there that recommended that I go and look at the Russian Orthodox Church. They were doing some struggling of their own. There were a couple different types of...
this was locally?
Locally, yeah. A couple of different Russian Orthodox traditions here in the States. Moscow Patriarchate and the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, known as Rokor. And they were kind of enmeshed in a battle, amongst themselves.
Which one wins out?
Right. And so ultimately there was a joining of those two churches, but that was after my time with them. I was there for a couple of years, went through another seminary program. So after I left the Catholic priesthood, I did 3.5 more years of seminary between 3 different traditions.
That's a lot of seminary.
Yeah. So all in total, I probably have about 400 or 500 hours of graduate, theology. So good times. Yeah. So I got what was considered a degree in like a master's in theology and applied Orthodox studies. Right.
Is that where you're at now, or no, you're not? Right, where
it gets more interesting.
Where do you land now?
So, my wife and I unchurched at some point a couple of years ago. And,
was that during COVID?
It was just before COVID. And part of that was we had made our way out of Orthodoxy. It wasn't working for me. There was a lot of kind of national tendency there that, didn't really want to see an American, in the priesthood there. They wanted they wanted the Serbian, priest in the Serbian church, using Serbian, even though 3 people in the pews understood it, and out of the 50 people that were there, kind of a thing. So I left there, and ultimately my wife and I landed in the Episcopal Church, and loved it there. Great home for me,
which has a lot of the same sort of historic traditions and practices, right?
Yeah, kind of the Diet Coke of Catholicism. It's like all the fun, no sugar. Kind of. So, I spent a few years there, did some theological studies, did the testing for ordination, and in the end was working actually downtown. I was at Bethlehem Lutheran, serving as an associate pastor there. And long story short, Bishop and I didn't see eye to eye on things. I would have had to have gone the route of switching again and going possibly to the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And I just wasn't interested in another year or 2 of seminary and all the fun stuff. So my wife and I ultimately unchurched. We are still, very spiritual individuals. I always considered myself pretty religious, even though I wasn't in a church anymore, and so that's kind of where we've left it.
So that's where you sit now.
Yeah.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, from time to time, I do. I miss. It's funny the things that you miss. I miss I miss the services. I miss the ceremonies. Most of all,
the practice
of it.
Because the practice, one of the buddies of mine in this men's book club is he's at one of the Orthodox churches all of a sudden, right? he said, and what he's saying right now is, he grew up in a Christian home, and then really, fell away from it, trying to figure out where his own personal faith is, right? Journey. And then really in the last like 3 months, he's become, I don't remember which Orthodox church is, or, but he talks about the idea of that Sunday practice. And then he's like, I got, a prayer book for the first time. I've never had a prayer book, and saying the same thing 30 some times in the morning is a new way for me to get into meditation state, to then see to be able to actually learn again for myself, right? So that would be a miss. You're saying that the church or
that's
that
part
practice.
of what I would miss. Okay. Part of belonging, I would say I miss a community. But I think a lot of people during COVID experienced what I had experienced maybe the year before, where you're separating from that community. And I think a lot of people just decided that they didn't need to go back. So you see a lot of people who were in churches that aren't in churches now.
A lot of people that are religious, but church is not a place that they feel like they have to be anymore to be religious, is how you would say. Is that where you guys are at in that?
Kind of, I think so. I've become a little bit less, I don't know how to say this. I'm less worried about the where and the who and the how of an afterlife now. That's not a concern that I take to heart so much anymore. I've focused instead on how can I make sure that the people that I love, the people that I meet, the people that I work with are doing well here and now. And so it's a little bit different kind of a thing. I've taken kind of my eye off the place in the sky and kind of brought it back more down to earth more.
One of the pastors at Ada Bible Church back in the day, which really helped me with that perspective, was you can focus on the future of, okay, here I do all these things and then heaven comes, right? And welcome, good servant, right? Those things, right? But the idea of, is heaven here now, right? And the idea of like, wait a minute, if I've accepted Jesus Christ, or I've accepted that as my faith story, what am I living now? And should I just live now instead of always worrying about the skeletons, as you talked about earlier, right? And being so focused on the death side of my forgiveness, but ultimately, what am I in preparation for that now by doing with people that are around me?
I think that's something I took from my time in the Episcopal Church, was just that sense of community, and you can express your faith, whatever that is, through actions. And you don't have to be part of any particular thing, group, tradition, have any type of certification, degree, etc. You can be out there in the community loving people and doing what's right, just because that's the right thing.
Right. Like my past father-in-law, who's passed away now, he would say, I'm not the guy going to go on missions,
right?
But I'm the guy who employs 150 people, and they are my ministry every day, right? And my ministry is to serve them, and then in serving them, we make money, and then I can give money to those that are out, right? So this a very different, right? The idea that I think you talked about, like when you're in your 20s, the Catholic Church sort of was like, okay, you can either just be, have a bunch of babies and work, which is still fine, but like if you really want to be,
you got to escalate.
You got to go to this thing. If you really want to be important, or you want to do
the calling,
right? And the calling isn't necessarily do the work here with the people that you love or are around you, right? So that's fascinating to me to see that transition for people. And that was, again, this this conversation that we had last week about it was last week Monday, about religion and the idea of like around this table, who is going to church and who is not, and where do we define that now?
Right.
Since COVID, I feel like this is a COVID thing for most, that like we didn't attend, and so then it's like, okay, is that do we need it or do we not, and what are we missing by not?
Right.
But then in that conversation, and I feel it doing these podcasts all of a sudden, that religion and is now being talked about more than what I remember it being talked about when I was part of the church. Does that make sense? Like,
sure.
Like the conversations that people are trying to figure out, and maybe that's just because I'm in my mid 40s and all these other people are in that age group that they're I listened to just like the 15 minutes where Mel Gibson was talking to Joe Rogan on his podcast. I don't know if you've seen any of these clips, but it's really fascinating because Mel Gibson is a Catholic. And so he's trying to tell Joe Rogan about his faith, and Joe Rogan's just asking questions, right? And Mel basically is like, yeah, your childhood, how do you put it? Your childhood is learning and agreeing to the Christian belief that your parents told you, and you have faith in those studies based on your family does, and this is the community I'm part of. So I'm going to have faith in those people, and in those people, I'm going to have faith in what they're telling me. Right. But adulthood, it feels like, is starting to creep in for those that I'm around, where they're like, okay, that was my parents' faith. I agreed in that faith journey, and that's still a part of me. But because of COVID was the break in that for people, I feel like that because that time to be quiet for 3 months to a year, right? By the time we really were able to really get back to anything was a year. That they then had to start choosing for themselves instead of being part of that community. They had to choose their own community. And so this unchurching happened, or
they motivated themselves to go and do it, or to discover what it is that they believed.
But I feel like they're just, again, maybe that's just the people around me. They're just starting to really debate it now. Like that they feel open to debating it. Are you seeing that?
I do, yeah. Because of my background, I can't seem to go very many places, with, friends of my wife's, or like, go to a gathering of people without somebody asking me questions about religion.
Right. Are they trying to figure it out? These people,
yes,
are they asking because of your studies?
Because of my studies, my background.
You've got such a broad study then basis, right?
Yes.
It's not just like I'm one religion or one sect of religion. It's like I have all these different.
Yeah, and I've served in a lot of different communities.
Right.
So, so I get questions all the time, and particularly in those kind of social settings where people feel more comfortable. They want to talk about it, they want to ask, or they want to tell you their story.
What is the main question that you're getting these days? Like, where do people start that conversation with someone that they're like, okay, I like this guy, I can relate with him. He obviously has a background and is choosing his own path. Like, I'm trying to figure out, where are they starting that?
I think most of the time it starts with just so I was thinking about this, going to this place, or I was listening to this podcast or this preacher, speaking, and I wanted to see what you thought about him, or, what do you know about this group or tradition or a particular parish or church, in the area, that kind of thing. That's where it usually starts. I think most of the time folks have kind of done the soul searching at some point, prior to that conversation. So that's what I notice. And it's been curious the last few years in particular, since COVID lockdown. The change is, so I tried this thing. I think that's what's going on. And people are trying
People are trying on different lenses.
Different things. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of folks my age, I'm a little older than you. I'm in my early 50s. And, we grew up with, this is your church, this is your tradition, your parents, your grandparents, etc. And a lot of folks our age, their parents are passed away. They've passed away, or they're far enough away that they feel like they can make their own decisions about church.
So they are starting to think, because of their parents not being an influence anymore, they're trying to figure out their own
and what appeals to them in a tradition and what doesn't. And I think a lot of folks growing up in a church, if it was a particularly conservative church or a church that had some pretty staunch views on things like abortion, women's rights, sexuality, gender, they're making decisions on their own based on what they believe about those things rather than about what their church believed about those things.
And so you think that story or that conversation is coming about more now than you had before?
I do. And I think in part that's happening because people have that freedom now.
Right.
A global pandemic gave us a new lease on life in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at just the way that stores and restaurants operate now versus prior to the pandemic, right? Yeah. The days of wandering, Walmart or Meijer at 2 a.m, and being the only person in there are gone.
Right.
They close, they go home. They've learned during COVID, they don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
There are restaurants that say, we're not going to open until 4 because nobody comes in at lunch anymore. Yeah. So people are making choices based on what works best for them that they weren't doing prior to COVID. And I think that applies to religion as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Joel Peterson. I don't know if you follow his stuff.
No.
But Joel is he is doing podcasting ultimately, but then he's done like these 3 studies, which is Genesis and Exodus, and the Gospels is the one that he just got done with. But basically brings around like 8 people to debate the Gospels.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, I think that's the world that I see us in right now, or the people that I'm around, is just like, hey, let's learn all, right? Like, I don't want the same group around me that talk the same language, right?
Yeah.
I do want the priest, and I want the Jewish person, and I want the secular person. And from that, I can learn and grow and choose for myself, instead of assuming that this bubble is the bubble that equals that, right?
I feel like the more that we expose ourselves to new and interesting things and people, the more likely we are to be well-rounded and just live better and happier lives. And so I do feel that's important. That kind of diversity of friends.
So we have about 10 minutes left, because you just gave me the 10-minute marker. So because we could talk for a couple more hours, but they, at some point it's like such a big file, they can't even upload it anymore. So, but I would like to understand or see where your thoughts are on this process in living a nonprofit heart in a for-profit world, right? And so it's, again, that idea of like, okay, I do this work, I get paid X. I might go to church, I might not. I serve people around me, but is that good enough? Like, is that, how do you portray that or balance from, cooking food at Meltrotter and working with people coming in? And I mean, I've been on the Meltrotter service line, right? How do you balance all of this knowledge and experience of your 50 years, and trying to do good work with those around you and feeling fulfilled by that, instead of being in 100% in that do good world, right? And
there was definitely a transition, and I would say that it came in stages. After I left Meltrotter, I went to work at ultimately, it was at John Knox Presbyterian Church, but it was a community food pantry there. And the focus in that community was largely on seniors that lived in the area
Okay.
there. And so I'm sure you can imagine Kentwood is an interesting melding pot these days.
Yeah, we live in Kentwood.
Do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I love it.
Lots of great folks there. The
Yeah.
school's very diverse. You have a huge Burmese population, some
Yeah.
great restaurants and traditions
Yeah.
that, are coming out of the East, and just some really neat stuff going on. But there's also this community of seniors that live in those Sears Roebuck kit homes that they built
Yeah.
in the 50s, and they're house rich and everything else poor,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
their spouses passed away when they were in their 60s, probably 25 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
They live in a house all by themselves. Their kids have moved away.
Yeah.
A lot of them have moved out of state. So they don't really have any structure, it's
Yeah.
kind of a safety net structure.
Yeah.
So they rely on the pantries in the area there to help with kind of supplementing. They were making choices between buying food, and paying for medication.
Right.
And so seniors became a big piece of my nonprofit life the last few years that I was
Yeah.
working in that field.
And it's still and then you transitioned into that,
Yes,
right? Like
yeah.
that is what you're doing now.
Yes. So what I noticed was that seniors weren't well cared for, and that a lot of them were very poor. There was a lot
Yeah.
of poverty in that group, living kind of Social Security check to Social Security check. The Medicare system, for all it's good, doesn't do a lot to provide care if you're not in the hospital.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
it'll take care of,
Some
copay at the
bills,
doctor's
yeah.
office, maybe your medication will be reduced in pricing, that kind of thing. You're in the hospital. But when you get discharged back home, med reminders, bathing assistance, if you're prone to falls, some help with transfers, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. All of that stuff comes out of pocket, for a lot of folks. And it's pretty expensive, and that's what I do. I own a home care company, but I looked at that opportunity as kind of a place where I could try to balance the private duty, where
Yeah.
we're taking care of folks that can afford to pay for it, and kind of supplementing a little bit those folks that are income-based Medicaid recipients,
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
the Michigan Choice Waiver Program, or the Senior
Yeah.
Senior Millage Program,
Yeah. So did you feel like those were the folks that were falling through the cracks? Like I think back
Yes,
to your
those are
realm
the same
experience
seniors,
at
yeah.
being 18
Yeah.
and seeing the beggar, and then you're
This
seeing
was the new Sudanese refugee,
For you.
Yeah, for
Okay.
me. So,
And so when you go to work, do you see that? Like, does that
I
feel
do.
that way now?
Yeah, I do. I look at we have 170 maybe folks that we take care of, maybe around 200.
Yeah.
And about 60% of them are folks that are in a program paid for through Medicaid, which is income based.
Yeah.
And so we're in the homes providing care for them a couple of hours, a couple times a week, or a couple times a day, depending, based on their needs. And I feel like the work that I'm doing is giving them a new lease on life,
Yeah.
and these are those
Yeah,
same
you're
folks.
ministering,
Yeah,
right?
it's ministry.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful when I can also take care of folks that have the money to pay for it themselves, or
Yeah.
have long-term care insurance, or something that pays for it. But it really it kind of fuels me to take care of those that I know wouldn't have that care otherwise. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, we don't have much time left. What would you like people to know that we haven't talked about? Is there anything that
Gosh.
hits you that I mean,
I'm a true believer in living simply, but like always saying yes. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I've lived my life. My kids are older now. The youngest is 18, off to college in the fall, and my wife and I are just getting to that point where we're looking at, okay, now we can go and do the things that we haven't done for 20 years because
Yeah.
we've had kids we were raising.
Yeah.
I don't want to say no to any of those opportunities, those
Yeah.
trips, travel, whether that's, going to a mission state, or something along those lines, or Habitat for Humanity
Right.
after hurricane. I want to be able to say yes. And I think if you do that, if you say yes to those opportunities and you live simply otherwise, it's entirely possible to have joy.
Yeah.
I have a joy in my life, a newfound joy, I would say, kind of balancing taking care of others and family, and self.
Yeah.
That's probably the element that I've added in the last couple of years that wasn't real big in my vocabulary.
Taking care of self.
Taking care of self.
Yeah.
So, a couple of years of therapy has really gone a long way. So,
Yeah, it's amazing how that can help, right?
Yep.
Yeah, unpacking
Unpack
yourself.
all those things.
Yeah,
and,
because you're supposed to take care of everybody else,
Yes,
especially when with your background.
It's like when you get on an airplane, they tell you, parents take the mask and put it on yourself before you administer it to the children. That would have been my last thought,
Right.
But it's true, because if you can't, if you don't do that first, you're not going to be able to take care of them, and they're not going to have the sense to do it themselves or the capability.
Yeah.
So I tell caregivers, family caregivers, this all the time. Take care of yourself so you can take care of your loved one.
Yeah.
Get a respite, take a break, bring us in, take 4 hours off, take a day off, take a weekend off, have a caregiver from our place come in so that you can go and take care of yourself, because that's important too. You can't be the long-term caregiver for your loved one if you don't take care of yourself.
So to finish up, what are you telling your kids right now? Like, how are you, so you've got 50 years of experience, right? And a very full 50 years of life. Like, it's very full, and it's really cool to hear your journey.
Yeah.
Like, what are you, I think of like, we're debating this at our house right now. They're 16. They don't have jobs yet. And so they're going to be put on a 90-day notice here this weekend of, it's time. You guys, it's time to go do the thing, do life. You really don't like your parents right now because you're bored, right? And you're 16-year-old boys, and you need to go away from your parents.
Absolutely.
Like go work and go do things, right?
Go away to college.
Good kids, right? But like,
yeah.
what are you telling these young adults? You're 18 and up. Like, where you've transitioned in life into being the guide, and now they're all heading out into the world.
Yes.
What are you saying to them as we close up?
Well, I can tell you what I know I'm not saying to them anymore, and that's don't go into nonprofit work. I mean, I was putting my experience, my trauma, my baggage on them, saying, I don't want you guys to have this that I had.
Yeah.
Because it's a burden, to do that type of engagement. So now I'm telling them, just make sure that whatever you're doing is meaningful and that you're happy. And whatever makes you happy will make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard, but
it's hard, right? Because you know all the things, so you want to balance them not being hurt.
It's like you're going to want to travel, and you're going to want to go places and do things, and you can't do that on a $25,000 a year salary nonprofit. So
yeah,
we love you anyway.
Yeah,
do what you want to do.
Make yourself happy. Thank you for coming and hanging out and telling your story and your journey, because it's a very different one than I think most have. If people want to get connected with you, how would they do so?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. My name is my handle on both of those.
Yeah. Awesome. So if you want to talk nonprofit, if you want to talk theology, I guess, right? I mean, you got so much time and investment. But also, if you're looking for care for
if you've got a loved one that needs some care,
right? You're the guy.
Give us a buzz.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Good to hang out.
Good to see you.